Shalom, everyone. Shalom. Welcome to the Way Wednesdays virtual Midrash. This is kind of like doing church, but not going to the building, right? So it's kind of convenient in our day and age. So glad that you can join me. We're going through the Torah portion, Numbers 13 through 15. It's one of my favorite passages, but it's also one of those really sad passages because they were so close and then they didn't make it, right? And lots of lessons for us to learn today. So we are going to jump right into the text. I think we're going to have a lot of fun. If you guys have questions, go ahead and put those in the chat, and I'll do my best to get to those after I get through this. All right. So here we go. All right. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Send men to spy out the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the children of Israel. From each tribe of their fathers you shall send a man, everyone a leader among them. All right. So what is God's perspective? What's his point in doing this? I would suggest that he's like, look, I want you to go check out this really amazing thing that I have for you. Right. It's kind of like, I bought this car for you and I want you to go see it. Go to the dealer and check it out. Right. And, they go there. They're like, yeah, it's a good car, except there's no way we can afford it. but of course, it was a gift, right? And that's the basic thing that we have here. And the failure in this chapter, unfortunately, is going to linger with them. And I want you to know that if you have faced some of the same kind of issues where you believe God, but then you kind of don't, you're not alone, right? There's lots of us that fall into that same basic trap. All right. So, good news is that God still loves us. He makes a way, but we're going to see that we've got to be careful. All right. So Moses sent them from the wilderness of Paran according to the command of the Lord, all of them men who were heads of the children of Israel. Now, these were their names: from the tribe of Reuben, Shammua, the son of Zachur; from the tribe of Simeon, Shaphat, the son of Hori; from the tribe of Judah, Caleb, the son of Yefuneh; from the tribe of Issachar, Igal, the son of Joseph; from the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea, the son of Nun, which is Joshua, excuse me; from the tribe of Benjamin, Palti, the son of Raphu; from the tribe of Zebulun, Gadiel, the son of Sodi; from the tribe of Joseph, that is, from the tribe of Manasseh, the Gadi, the son of Sushi, not Sushi, sorry; from the tribe of Dan, Amiel, the son of Gemali; from the tribe of Asher, Setur, the son of Mikael; from the tribe of Naphtali, Nahbi, the son of Vofshi, right? Vofsi, there we go. I think I can get these eventually. From the tribe of Gad, Gawel, the son of Machi. These are the names of the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land. And Moses called Hoshea, the son of Nun, Joshua. Okay, so originally his name was Hoshea, right? Hoshea means salvation. And then it's Yehoshua, right? So then becomes God. Yehovah is salvation. All right, then Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, Go up this way into the south and go up into the mountains and see what the land is like, whether the people who dwell in it are strong or weak, few or many, whether the land they dwell in is good or bad, whether the cities they inhabit are like camps or strongholds, whether the land is rich or poor, and whether there are forests there or not. Be of good courage and bring some of the fruit of the land. Now the time was a season of first ripe grapes. So they went up and spied out the land of the wilderness of Zin as far as Rehov, near the entrance of Hamat. And they went up through the south and came to Hebron. Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, were there. Now Hebron was built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. Then they came to the valley of Eshcol, and there they cut down a branch with one cluster of grapes, which is the word Eshcol. And they carried it between the two of them on a pole. They also brought some of the pomegranates and figs. So this is amazing stuff, right? It's the land flowing with milk and honey, right? This is incredible produce. It's beautiful. It's lush. It's rich. I mean, this is the real deal, right? And you'd think this would be so much that, they're going to go for it. But unfortunately, the place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster, Eshcol, which the men of Israel cut down there. And they returned from spying out the land after 40 days. Now they departed and came back to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the children of Israel in the wilderness of Paran at Kadesh. They brought back word to them and to all the congregation and showed them the fruit of the land. All right, so far so good, right? They're bringing back the souvenirs that they have from the land. Look at all this amazing stuff. Look at this fruit, right? It's just like the Lord said, right? He clearly brought us here and he told us all this great stuff. All right. What do we have to worry about? Nothing, right? But then they told him and said, we went to the land where you sent us. It truly flows with milk and honey. And this is its fruit. Nevertheless, the people who dwell in the land are strong. The cities are fortified and very large. Moreover, we saw the descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south. The Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and along the banks of the Jordan. Okay, so far, except for the word nevertheless, they haven't really said anything negative. They've simply reported what Moses asked. Are the people there strong? Do they have big cities? Right? That's the kind of stuff that they need to know. All right. So they're just giving a report here, but of course it's going to quickly turn south, unfortunately. And we can see here that Caleb, he's trying to get the people to go for it. Then Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are well able to overcome it. Right? Good words, Caleb. Right? And he's going to be saying that all the way, right, until the end of the book of Joshua, where he does some amazing exploits. Right? He's up advanced in years, and he's like, I'm still ready. Let's go. Who's with me? Right? I mean, this guy is pretty awesome, even though his name means dog. But he's a fighter. But the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. Even that statement is true, right? That statement is true. But what are they forgetting? Big thing, right? Elephant in the room. God, right? The whole point was, of course you can't do it. Are you crazy? Who's suggesting that you could go in and take over this land all by yourselves? I mean, that's ridiculous to think that. Okay. Of course you can't, but it's God who's going to go before you. Were you Israelites able to get yourselves out of bondage of Egypt? No, not at all. But when God went before you and he made the way, you could do it. Were they able to part the Red Sea all by themselves? Of course not. Right? That was God's power working through Moses to do this incredible feat. Right? And we see time and again, they do all these things, or God does all these things, and they're kind of like, maybe we should go back to Egypt because it was so much better. Right? Even though God is saving them using and working through Moses, 10 times he does this. And what is their response? Whatever, right? We don't believe it. We're sick of it. Let's go back to Egypt. We like being slaves better. Whatever. Okay, now you might say, well, what was so terrible about the land? Well, here they mention this, and they gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land, which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. All right. So, yeah, they definitely had some big people there, right? We learn in the book of Deuteronomy that King Og of Bashan's bed, or possibly his sarcophagus, was 9 cubits long. All right. Now, I had the distinct pleasure of going to the British Museum in London. It was quite exciting. And I wanted to see a Egyptian royal cubit. I knew they had it there because I did a little research on this whole thing. And I wanted to measure it for myself. And so, we went politely, knocked at the research door, and they said, what do you like to do? I said, I want to see a Egyptian royal cubit. They said, okay, wait here for a bit. And I don't know, about 15 or 20 minutes later, they came back and they said, okay, follow me. It was so exciting going in the back halls of the British Museum. And they took me into this room with all these drawers, and they pulled one out, and there was the Egyptian royal cubit. Right? I was like, wow. So they made me put on gloves. I got to go to this table, and I got to measure the thing. I got to hold it. It was really incredible. They said I couldn't take my own pictures, which is kind of a bummer, but okay, whatever. So it was 20.63 inches long. So the cubit, what cubit would Moses have been talking about in Deuteronomy chapter 3, other than the one that he would have grown up on, which is the Egyptian royal cubit? All right, so if King Og of Bashan was 9 cubits tall, quickly do the math, that means that his sarcophagus was that long. That means his sarcophagus was about 15 feet, 15.4 feet long, and knock off a little bit just because, the sarcophagus is bigger than him. So, he's roughly 15 feet tall. 15 feet tall, right? I'm 6'2", right? So he would have been 2.5 times my height. Okay. That's a big dude. All right. And then it's just simply a matter of just doing the math to figure out how much he would have weighed. And then, so he would have been about 1,500 pounds, roughly, somewhere in there. I forget exactly the number. But and then based on that, you can figure out his basal metabolic rate. That's the minimum amount of calories he would have needed just to keep his heart ticking. All right. So again, I did the math on that. He needed about 20,000 calories a day. That means if he's just lying still doing nothing, he's kind of on his deathbed type thing, right? That's how many calories he needs just to keep the ticker going. All right, so he probably needed quite a bit more than that because he was probably an active dude, right? And he probably would have consumed a whole bunch more, okay? So even the basal metabolic rate means he would have needed to eat a lot, all right? And when they say that it's a land that devours its inhabitants, sure enough, right? This was a land that devours its inhabitants. When we take a look at the Second Temple literature, for example, we look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and we find there the accounts of the giants. Okay, there it's talking about how the land had become very corrupt, and that giants were eating and creating monsters. It's kind of some fragments of this giant text, but what it's talking about is that they were making monsters. They were eating other people, presumably. When you start listening to some of the accounts from the Native Americans here in America, right, they're talking about the giants that they uncovered. This is Chief Joseph Riverwind. He talks about this, that there were these huge giants that were cannibalizing people. Okay. I don't know if cannibalizing is the right word, since they're not exactly the same species, but they're both humanoid, right? So, in other words, it was a land that devours its inhabitants, right? This wasn't just big talk. They're like, well, they're exaggerating or something like that. No, it was a crazy place. And of course, we find King Og many other places. Now, if you're interested, I wrote Corrupting the Image Volume 2. And I went into lots and lots of fun detail, also in Corrupting Image 1. But in Corrupting Image 2, I go into even more detail about King Og of Bashan, what he was all about. I traced his name back to Sumerian. And Ug, it comes from a word that means death. Okay. Oh, boy. So here's King of Death, right? And he probably was very closely related, if not exactly the same, as the Amorite god, whose name was Amuru, or in Sumerian, his name was Martu. All right. So Martu is the same root as Nimrod, right? Nimrod. And we also find the same as Marduk, right? They're all the same root. Quite interesting when you start putting all this together. And who did they find in the land? They found the Amorites. Now, let me take you to another passage to just drive home this point of how big these guys were. All right, so God is speaking here in Amos 2:9. He says, yet it was I, God says, I destroyed the Amorite before them, whose height was like the height of the cedars, and he was as strong as the oaks, yet I destroyed his fruit above and his roots beneath. All right, so I don't think God is one to exaggerate, personally. I don't know. Just a thought there. I don't think God really exaggerates. God doesn't need to tell us a big fish story, right? The fish that I caught was was this big, right? right? We'd be like, yeah, it was this big. But God's like, I don't care. I don't need to exaggerate. I can tell you whatever I want because he's God. He's got nothing to prove. He doesn't have to show off for us, right? So God is just telling us how big these guys were. They were like the height of the cedar trees. Now, a cedar tree can grow anywhere from 40 to 80 feet tall. So let's take the minimum, about 40 feet tall. And where else do we find something likened to a cedar tree? We find that in the book of Job, speaking of the behemoth, where the behemoth had a tail that was like a cedar tree. And thanks to archaeology, they've discovered that the Diplodocus, which was a type of the sauropod class of dinosaurs, the Diplodocus had a tail that was 40 feet long. And interesting, it didn't drag it on the ground, but it was actually out erect as it was walking along. So there you have another confirmation of how tall these guys were. And so if some of them are 40 feet tall, then King Og, who was said to be of the remnant of the Rephaim or of the Amorites, right? He's just a remnant of the Nephilim. Apparently he's not that tall, right? So we don't know exactly how tall they were. Sadly, I wish we could find some bones of these guys, but sadly they're nowhere to be found. None that I know of. Okay, now I know there's a guy named Joe Blanc, I think his last name is. He has a museum down in Texas, and he purports to have a femur of a giant. I have not done the research myself to know if what he has is authentic. The best I know is that it's a cast. Where you got the original, I'm not sure. All right, but if you want to check that out, you go to Joe Blanc Creation Museum in Texas, and you can look for more of that kind of stuff. Okay, now in Corrupting the Image Volume 1, I actually do talk more about giants, and I show from newspaper clippings. Now you might say, why don't you go with pictures? Because a lot of the pictures we have online are fake, right? It's so easy to make a fake nowadays. So I didn't want to get trapped in going after fake photos, things that have been photoshopped, and saying, look, here's the proof, and yet it turns out to just be just fakery. Okay, so what I was able to find is that there are newspaper clippings from the 1800s and earlier that have eyewitness testimony of very large bones that have been found. Okay, so again, I don't have those bones. I have not seen them with my own eyes, but you have testimony of people who are saying that they found things that are really big. Like one time they found a foot, okay, and this foot was 2 feet long. I know it doesn't make sense, right? But you basically take the size of the foot and you multiply it times 6, and that's how you figure out how tall somebody is. Okay, so a guy my height, 6 feet tall, 6'2". My feet are roughly 12 inches, roughly. Okay, that's the basic idea. Okay, so if you have a foot that's 24 inches, that means that the guy using that foot would have been about 12 feet tall, right? So we do have evidence. It's we just don't personally, we don't have the bones to talk about, but there have been many people who have found them and they've reported on these. So there you go. Okay, so again, really big guys, and this means that by the time we get to Goliath's only about 10 feet tall. They seem to be getting shorter as time goes on. In Corrupting the Image Volume 2, I took a look at Gilgamesh, which means the great ancient hero. And Gilgamesh probably stood about 18 feet tall, at least according to the account of Gilgamesh. That's about how tall he was. Okay, so 18 feet tall. And there's actually a carving, an ancient carving of Gilgamesh in the Louvre Museum in France, and he's about 18 feet tall. That doesn't prove that the actual dude was 18 feet tall, but it is kind of interesting. All right, so there is evidence when you start looking for it, and I'm very well convinced that there were absolute giants, and they were gigantic. And even, the sons of Anak. Anak means maybe long-necked, but these guys were huge. They were gigantic. The word for Anak in Hebrew the word for giant in Hebrew is Anak, okay? So again, there's so much there. So when they went into the land and they saw the giants, they're like, nope, we're not going to be doing this thing, right? There's no way we can take these giants down. And that was their problem. You see, if we minimize the size of the giants, what we're really doing is we're minimizing the size of our God. But if the giants are big, then our God has to be bigger. So yes, the giants were very big. They were brutal. They were powerful. They were dangerous. They were deadly. And apparently they were eating people. So that's pretty scary, right? And that's the point, is that God was taking them into a place where they themselves, by their own strength, could not do it. That's what he wanted to do. And they came back and they said, nope, there's no way we can do it. But of course they couldn't. I mean, that's like Peter saying, hey, Lord, if it's you, command me to get out of the boat. And he starts to put his foot outside and he's like, well, there's no way I can do this, right? Of course you can't, Peter. And that seems to be the case, is that as he's actually walking on water, he probably started thinking, wait, I can't do this. And down he went. But when you have faith in the big God that we serve, then the impossible becomes very possible. That's the whole point, is that, yeah, they were dangerous. They were big. They were ugly, these giants. But God is bigger, stronger, more powerful, right? God can take down any giant. And the problem that we face so often is we may not be facing, literal, really tall giants, but there are giants in our lives, right? It could be that somebody is sick. It could be that we don't have enough money. It could be that we don't know where to live, whatever it may be, whatever your problem today or yesterday or this week. It seems gigantic, right? Look, I know I have my own list of gigantic things that seem impossible, right? And you're like, how am I going to ever do this? And that's the problem when I start saying, how am I going to do this? So what's the solution? The solution is thanksgiving, that we give thanks to God, that not that I'm able, but that he is able. And we give thanks to God that, yeah, the land's full of giants. I'm not excited about the giants. Really, I'm not. But I'm thankful that the God that I serve has promised to go before me and to take down the giants. That's what I'm thankful for. Does that make sense? Right? So we're not excited about the storm that we find ourselves in. I grew up in Michigan, so I spent a lot of time on the Great Lakes in my parents' small sailboats. And I'll tell you, those sailboats, we had one that was like 22 feet long, then a 26-footer. And when you're in a major storm, they feel incredibly small, right? And, yeah, the Great Lakes are not the ocean, but you know what? They'd have some doozy of storms there. And you start thinking, oh boy, we're in trouble. We're going down. Well, we made it through, thankfully. But, I was never excited about the storm. And even though there are storms in our lives, metaphorical storms, right? We're not saying, oh, Lord, thank you for this storm. I'm so excited about this storm. I love getting seasick, right? That's not the point. We're not excited about the storm, but we're thankful that God is with us in the storm. Too often we pray, Lord, take me out of the storm, or Lord, take me to a land that's not full of giants. But that's not how God operates. He's going to take us to a land of giants because he knows that we cannot do it. But if we work with him and he works through us, then we are able to take down those giants. And so that's what happened here to the children of Israel. They got their eyes, sadly and radically, off the one who was able to take down the giants. And they said that we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. That's true. But God was able. Okay. And this is terribly unfortunate. This is the moment when they were so close to the promised land, right? They'd spent a year in the wilderness and they just had this one more thing to do. They were ready to cross over and now they can't. I mean, remember the previous time Miriam started kind of spouting off about, well, why does Moses get all the credit here? I'm a prophetess too, right? And so then they had to wait 7 days, right? They're all ready to go. And then they have to wait. And now they come here and they come up to the land. Okay, go spy it out. We're ready to go, guys. And then the ones that they trusted with spying out the land come back and they give a bad report. They gave the children of Israel a bad report of the land which they had spied out, saying, the land through which we've gone as spies is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great stature. There we saw the giants, the Nephilim is the word there, Nephilim. It's the same word, Nephilim, as we find in Genesis chapter 6. And what happened in Genesis chapter 6? Well, let's go take a look because it's so fun to take a look at that. One of my favorite passages. All right, Genesis 6. Now it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. I'm going to skip to verse 4. There were giants, Nephilim, on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. All right. So there were giants, there were Nephilim on the earth in those days. That's the same word, right? And how did they come about? Well, we're told very clearly that the sons of God, which are divine beings, sons of God, angelic beings, if you will, they saw human daughters, human women, right? That they were beautiful. Now, this word in Hebrew doesn't say beautiful. It says tovot, which is that they were good. It could be that they're talking about their looks, that they were attractive. That's possible. I tend to think that it wasn't so much that they were necessarily physically or sexually attracted to them as they saw them as a means to an end, that they were good. They were good for something. And that something was to make these Nephilim, right? That's just my personal take on that. But just understand that the word in Hebrew is not actually beautiful. It's not yafot. Is that they were tovot. Okay, here it is. Ki tovot henna. All right, so that's the text that's in question here. All right. Well, let's get back to our passage there in Numbers chapter 13. All right, so who do they find? They found giants. And it says the descendants of Anak, again, giants, come from the Nephilim, and we were like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight. All right, a grasshopper compared to a human is a pretty big difference here. So they may be exaggerating just a little bit, right? I mean, chances are that, I'm probably, I'm probably 140 times taller than a grasshopper. If a grasshopper is about half an inch, right? So I'm 74 inches. So that would put me at 148 inches, 148 times half an inch, right? For a grasshopper, right? So that's how many times taller. So probably they were not that much taller, but still they were tall, right? These guys were big. And if we take at face value what God is saying in Amos 2:9, that they were like the size of cedar trees. So they're somewhere probably in the area of 40 feet tall. Wow. All right. Well, sadly. All right. Chapter 14. So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among them, had spied out the land, tore their clothes, and they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. All right. Wow. I mean, there's so much in this passage right here. I want to point something out, right? Ach ba'Adonai al timrodu, right here. This word, oh goodness, where'd it go? Let me go back here. Don't rebel. All right, this word right here. All right, altimodu. Right, this word here is marad. Okay, marad means to rebel. It's the same root as nimod, let's rebel. And it's the same root as the god of the Amorites, Martu, or also known in Akkadian as Amuru. Interesting, right? Now, let's go back a little bit. So Nimrod, let's go back to Nimrod. In Genesis chapter 11, I love the Bible. It's so much fun. So, sorry, not 11, but 10. So here in 10, Cush begot Nimrod. He began to be a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, the mighty hunter before the Lord. All right, again, in Corrupt the Image 2, I spent a lot of time looking at Nimrod, right? Really interesting dude. Not a good guy, but you know. So in the Hebrew, it says that he began to be hu hechel lichot gibor ba'aretz. If we look at this in the Septuagint, it says that he began to be a gigas, a giant. So something happened to Nimrod. He wasn't just, really good with a bow and arrow, and God's like, wow, that guy's a great shot. That's not what was going on here. And again, there's too many details to explain here. I'll try to give just kind of a thumbnail sketch of what's going on. All right, so Nimrod in the ancient world was known as Ninurta, the Lord of the earth. Ninurta was the son of Enlil, Lord Air, okay? And Enlil we find in Isaiah chapter 14, looking at verse 12, how you were fallen from heaven, oh, here's the word, Halel, all right, this is what it is in Hebrew, Halel, son of the morning. Lucifer, I believe, is an unfortunate translation. I don't think it should be that, but it's too late, right? We can't convince everybody to stop using that word. All right, so Halel is his Hebrew name, or at least his Hebrew description. Where is that coming from? Well, we find the same word as Elil, okay, or Elilim, which are worthless idols. We find it in Akkadian as Elil, and then in Akkadian as Enlil. Enlil was known as the Lord Air, okay? So the Lord Air, or Enlil, he was the one who was a created being. He claimed to have usurped the authority of the creator God. And he took the Anu-ship. So the creator God's name is Anu. And Enlil stole earth. He took earth as his portion, and Anu took heaven as his portion. And this was the basic myth that was passed down for generations, right? So Enlil never claimed to be the creator, but Enlil says, look, I've basically stolen the Anu-ship, right? I've taken Anu's domain, I've taken his authority, and I've taken it to myself, okay? Well, it's interesting. The Bible talks about this as well. God said that he gave the dominion of the planet to Adam and Eve. And then in the garden, who comes along? The Nachash, right? The snake, which is one of the epithets of Satan. And we find that in Akkadian as well. I know I'm geeking out right now, okay? I'm trying to make it simple, guys, right? But there's just too many cool details to not explain them. So in the ancient world, there the great dragon was known as the Mushhushu, which I argue is related linguistically. The Mushhushu and the Nachash, I think they're actually the same root, but that's another discussion. I digress. But this great red dragon, the Mushhushu, was one of the epithets of this dragon fellow, of Enlil, okay? And he had a number of different names. He was also known as the Bashmu, which in Hebrew is Bashan, as in Og of Bashan. Very interesting, right? He was also known as the Ushumgal, or the Ushumgalu, which was the great dragon, right? So there's all these correlations that are showing us that these are one and the same dude, right? Satan has all these names in the ancient world. He's never known as Satan, except in the Bible, and very infrequently, mind you, certainly in the Old Testament, okay? But if you look at these other names, such as Enlil, and then all of his other epithets that go along with that, it becomes very, very interesting. And then Enlil was said to have the tablet of destinies. The tablet of destinies gave him authority and gave him the ability to control destinies of humanity. That was a big deal, right? It gave him legal right over the planet, right? And that's how he maintained his control. And you say, why didn't God just zap him? Because he had legal right. Where did he get it? Well, Adam and Eve kind of squandered it. He snookered him fair and square, you might say, right? He tricked them, and they fell for it, and that's that. Okay. And so back then he was holding the authority over the planet. Okay, so Enlil then bestows or imparts his authority to Ninurta. And again, Ninurta is Nimrod, right? They're exactly the same dude. All right. So he gives his authority to the rebel, right? And that root, Nimrod, is the same one that we find there in Numbers chapter 14, right? Where they say, only do not rebel al timrodu atem, right? So don't do this. Don't rebel. Don't go after this other God, the rebel, but go after Yehovah, right? Go after him. It's so much better. I mean, you start looking at these linguistic comparisons and understanding that the name of the Amorite god was Martu, the rebel, right? And here they're saying, don't rebel, right? Because when you're rebelling, you're actually going after these other gods. You're fearing these other gods, right? And he also says, do not fear the people of the land. When you fear somebody, you're giving them authority over your life. You're really following that person. The word fear has tiru here, in this case, al tiru. There's to be the fear of the Lord. Well, I'm not supposed to be afraid of God. Well, you're not supposed to be afraid in the sense that you're thinking he's going to knock you down at any moment. But there's a healthy fear that you understand who he is. And we should fear God more than we should fear these false gods, right? That's the point. And unfortunately, those guys back then and we today, we often fear the lesser gods instead of the greater God, because I don't know, we just do. And that's exactly what happened here. Now, I want to back up really quick, because what are they doing? Oh my goodness. What are they doing when they are weeping and they're saying this stuff? If only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in the wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to the land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Would it not be better for us to return to Egypt? What are these guys doing? I'll tell you what, they are slandering God. Slandering. They are slandering God. Slander is such a terrible thing. I want to take us to Ezekiel 28. I think this is such an important passage, talking here about Satan. Again, if you want all the details, I explain it in Corrupting Image Volume 2. I think it was incredibly interesting. It kept blowing my mind. I think it'll blow your mind too. All right, so you are the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You're on the holy mountain of God. You walk back and forth in the midst of the fire stones. You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created till iniquity was found in you, by the abundance of your trading. That's what it says in the King James, and I think basically most all the translations that I'm aware of. Okay, but the word here is rechulatcha. Rechulatcha is the same root as the word rakil. A rakil is a slanderer, right? A slanderer, and it's based on the word regel. Regel is as a foot. Okay, so it's the idea of coming and going. It's the exchanging of something. Right. And that's exactly what a slanderer does, is they're exchanging information, albeit not good information, and they're twisting it. Right. That's what a slanderer does. Now, here's where it gets kind of mind blowing. How do you say slanderer in Greek? That's the word diavolos, okay, which is to throw something through. Diavolos. And that's where we get the word el diablo, right? In Spanish, for example. And that's where, of course, we get the word devil. In English, but it comes from this root diavolos, which means to slander, right? So understanding that Satan was the first and greatest slanderer. In the Garden of Eden, did he slander? Oh, he sure did. How did he do it? Did he come right out and say, oh, God is such a liar? No, he didn't do that. He didn't do that. He simply called into question God's character. Has God really said, right? Did he really say that? And just by doing that, did he really do that? It's a terrible form of slander because it's questioning God's motives, his character, his intent, his love, his ability. It's questioning all those things and saying, I don't really think we can trust him. And so here in Numbers 14, the people are just blatant about it. And they're just saying, you know what? We can't trust God. Yeah, sure, he brought us out from Egypt, sort of. But now look what he's done. He's brought us all the way here just to kill us. This isn't the first time that they've said this. Remember, there they were at the Red Sea. They had a mountain on one side, they had the Red Sea on the other side, and they had Pharaoh's army on the other side. And they're like, oh, were there not enough graves in Egypt? You brought us out here to kill us. And then guess what? I don't know, the water just opens right up, right? And they all walk through on dry ground. And then their enemies come after them. And then guess what? The water's closed back. Wow. Imagine that, right? So they've seen God come through again and again and again, right? He rained down bread from heaven. He brought quail, right? All these times he did these amazing things. He brought water out of the rock. I mean, how many times do you have to be shown incredible feats that are not your everyday occurrences to finally start getting the idea, you know, I think I can trust God actually. And if he's done all of those things, if he took down the greatest army in the world, I'm sure he could do this as well. If he can part the Red Sea, he could probably take down a few giants, right? If he could do all those plagues in Egypt, then he could do this as well. And this is why all of us, not just these guys, but all of us need to keep a mental record or sometimes write down what God has been doing in your life. That's super important. Because I know we can go back and we can look at the stories and say, yeah, well, that's what God was doing back then. But he doesn't do that anymore. He doesn't do it for me. But when you start putting things on your prayer list and then you cross them off later, or you change the font color or something because God has answered that, then you can go back and say, oh my, God has been so faithful. So here's what I do. I have a whole list of things that I'm praying for. I keep it personal, right? I'm not sharing it with everybody because that's not what the point is. One reason I don't want to share my list, sometimes I share a thing or two, but I typically don't because you know what? You may not have the faith that I have at the moment, and you don't need to because it's a lot of these things are about my life and not about your life or things that I'm praying for and you're not praying for. But here's the fun part. As I put those on and I start thanking God for making these things happen, I'm thanking him before they even become a reality. That's what I'm thanking him for. And then, sometimes it's interesting because I'll be going along and I'm just kind of praying and thanking him. And then I kind of look up and I'm like, wait a second. I think God actually did that thing, right? And I start thinking about it. I'm like, oh yeah, he did fulfill that. He already gave me that. I just wasn't paying attention. And so then what I do is because I have it in a document, is then I change it from black font to green font because green means go, right? And so that tells me that God has answered this prayer. And it's so exciting as my prayer list keeps getting longer and longer and longer. And I don't go over every last item on it every day, but I try to always just look at it and then I will look at, some of the things that he's answered. I see that green and I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. He did that, right? And sometimes I go back and I'm like, well, yeah, he did that. But I'm like, wait a second. When I was praying for that thing, I remember I was praying for that, and it was kind of scary. I was a bit nervous about how it was going to turn out. And so I put this on my list as a big thing, not a little thing. And I'm always trying to pray big, right? Because it takes me no more effort to pray big than it takes to pray small, right? Just pray big. And so sometimes I can go back in my list and I'm like, oh, yeah, of course he did that, right? And I kind of take it for granted. But then I have to take that mental note and say, wait, stop, think about it. When I put this on the list, it was a giant. It was a giant, right? And I go back now and I'm like, oh, yeah, of course, that's just the way things are. But it didn't seem that way when I put it on the list. It seemed like a gigantic mountain moving thing. Like, who's going to take down this giant, Lord, or who's going to move this mountain? I didn't know. But now I've become accustomed to it because, well, God answered it. And of course he did. And I've kind of just gotten used to this new normal. That's the problem, is that we can get so used to the new normal. We can get used to, things happening, and then we just take them for granted. And then the next thing comes and we start to freak out. And we say, oh, I can't believe it. God has just left me. He's not going to help me at all. That's fear. And that's what the enemy would use to defeat us, is fear. We cannot let the fear rule over us. All right. And remember, when we start whining and complaining, oh God, why haven't you done this and that? We're kind of slandering God, especially if we've been walking with him for a while, is that we're not trusting his character and who he is. So it's something we have to repent for and change. And it's not hard to change. I mean, it takes some practice, but theoretically it's pretty easy. You just stop going this direction, you go that direction. And so don't rebel against the Lord. Don't fear the people of the land, right? God's going to take care of us. Don't fear them. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Oh my, don't stone the messenger, right? But Moses and Joshua and these guys, oh boy. Well, so the people clearly made their decision. We don't believe you and we don't believe God. Well, this is when the Lord intervenes. Then the Lord said to Moses, how long will these people reject me? And how long will they not believe me? With all the signs which I have performed among them. We can be, card-carrying Christians, Bible-thumping people, and yet we can be practical atheists at the same time. This is something that I'm often telling myself, and I'm also sharing with the congregation, at the Way congregation, that we've got to be careful. Just because we have some knowledge about God doesn't mean that we're actually following God or actually believing God, right? You can have certain doctrinal statements that you hold to be true, but at the same time, you're a practical atheist, because when it really comes to walking by faith, you're not doing it, or I'm not doing it, because well, I don't think God's really going to do that, but I believe these things about God, but I don't actually have a walk with the God of the Bible, right? And that's one of those scary places to be when we have knowledge about God. Satan had knowledge about God, but he clearly didn't have a walk with God. These people had knowledge about God. They knew, they were there. Oh yeah, well, God took us out of Egypt, and I mean, here we are. We're not in Egypt, right? So clearly, something happened. They weren't oblivious to this fact, and they had God's presence in their camp, right? They could see it. They still had every day the cloud by day and the fire by night, but they were still practical atheists. And let's just say that kind of annoyed God, okay? Because he says, how long will they not believe me with all the signs which I have performed among them? I will strike them with the pestilence and disinherit them, and I'll make of you a nation greater and mightier than they. Well, yeah, God's a little bit ticked. All right. And Moses said to the Lord, then the Egyptians will hear it, for by your might you brought these people up from among them, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land, that they have heard that you, Lord, are among these people, that you, Lord, are seen face to face, and your cloud stands above them, and you go before them in a pillar of cloud by day, and in a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you kill these people as one man, then the nations which have heard of your fame will speak, saying, because the Lord was unable to bring this people to the land which he swore to give to them. Therefore he killed them in the wilderness. And now I pray, let the power of my Lord be great, just as you have spoken, saying, the Lord is long-suffering and abundant in mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression. But he by no means clears the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation. Pardon the iniquity of this people, I pray, according to the greatness of your mercy, just as you have forgiven this people from Egypt, even until now. What a reversal here, right? So Moses is now telling God what God told Moses, right? This is where Moses, or God tells Moses in Exodus 34, this very thing. Okay, the Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord God, merciful and gracious, long-suffering, and abounding in goodness and truth, right? And then he goes on, keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, the children's children, the third and fourth generation. So Moses says to God what God said to him, right? And Moses is acting as this beautiful picture of an intercessor. I mean, he is an intercessor, right? He is interceding on behalf of the people who deserve his grace or don't deserve God's grace. I think they don't deserve God's grace. But Moses is saying, God, be gracious. And you might say, oh, God in the Old Testament, he's such a mean dude. He's always upset. No, he's not. He's not. He gets frustrated sometimes. I think anyone who's ever been a parent can appreciate that you sometimes get frustrated with your kids. You love them. You really do. But sometimes different stages in their development, they're just not listening. And even though you've said it, I told you a zillion times, and they're not listening, right? Now, we as parents are not perfect, right? But God is perfect. God is absolutely perfect. So here he's been telling the children of Israel, look, I'm going to go before you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to do all these things, right? Just trust me. And they're like, no, we're not going to trust you. And yes, that gets kind of frustrating. Now, how does this translate into our lives? Well, first of all, God doesn't really appreciate complaining, griping, moaning, any of that stuff, right? It gets annoying. And instead of complaining, right, this is how I used to pray. I used to sort of just complain, oh, Lord, why haven't you done this, that, and the other? Now I say, Lord, thank you. And it's revolutionized my prayer life, is when I thank him instead of complain about what I don't have, but I thank him for what I don't have as if I had it. Wow, it changes my whole outlook on life. And I think it's probably sounds a lot better to him. And, every so often I'm like, Lord, I'm really sorry that I spent all those years complaining. I just didn't understand. And I thank you for your grace and your mercy and your patience, right? And I know that he forgives me. But on the other hand, I also know that I wasted a lot of years praying in a way that was not effective, that was not good for either of us. And I can only imagine where I'd be today if I'd been praying differently back then. But, that's all speculation. So it's not worth getting beat up over. But understand that if we will pray differently and thank him, it'll turn out so differently. Imagine if the people said, oh, Lord, we're scared. They brought back this report of these really big guys, and we know that you've done so many great things. Will you be with us here? Yes, of course I will, right? But no, instead they said, let's go back, because we can't trust God. We can't trust Moses. He brought us out here to kill us. And even though Moses is like, come on, guys, just relax. It's going to be okay. Then they were going to pick up stones and stone these guys. That's how serious they were in their disbelief, right? Now, disbelief is a really bad thing. Hebrews chapter 3 tells us about disbelief, right? It's talking about this very thing. And he says, brethren, let's go back here. When your fathers tested me, all right, do not, I'll go back another verse, sorry. All right, so do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion in the day of trial in the wilderness, remember, don't rebel against the Lord. Do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me, tried me, and saw my works 40 years. So we're kind of jumping ahead a little bit. Therefore, I was angry with that generation, said they always go astray in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. Beware, brethren, lest any of you, there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. So they had an evil heart of unbelief and they departed from the living God. Ooh. But exhort one another daily while it's called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. For we have become partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of the confidence steadfast to the end. While it is said today, if you harden, you will hear his voice. Do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. For who, having heard, rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt, led by Moses? Yeah. Now, with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? And to whom did he swear? That they would not enter his rest, but to those who did not obey. So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. Why couldn't they enter in? Because of unbelief. And what is unbelief? Unbelief is disobedience. Ooh. Okay, it's disobedience. Therefore, since a promise remains of entering his rest, let us fear lest any of you seem to have come short of it. For indeed, listen, the gospel was preached to us, the good news, the evangelion was preached to us as well as to them. Whoa. The good news was preached to those guys as well as to us. How was it preached to them? Were they hearing about Jesus Christ all the day and that he, died on the cross? Is that what they were hearing? Of course not, right? They were not hearing about Christ dying on the cross and his blood taking away our sins. That they heard nothing of that. So that's not what the gospel is per se, okay? Please hear me out here. That's part of the good news, yes. But the good news is that God wants you to be in his kingdom and that he's made a way for you to enter his kingdom. That's the essence of the good news. Now, the blood of Christ is a very, very important part of that. Clearly, I agree with that, okay? But understand that when Jesus went around and he was preaching the good news, he wasn't saying, I'm going to go die on the cross. He only said that at the very end, okay? So there was always this invitation to come into the kingdom. You always came in by faith. You always came in by faith. You had to have a circumcised heart, right? So these things are universal, that you humble yourself before the Lord. You ask for his grace and his mercy, and he'll give it to you. And yes, he did an amazing work through the blood of Yeshua, right? That's a whole nother story, but that's part of it, but that's not the complete essence of the gospel. I hope that makes sense. All right, so for we who have believed to enter that rest, so as he said, so I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. All right, so enough on that. But their sin of unbelief was disobedience. That was a sin that they were not believing. And so when we do the same thing, when God has shown us again and again and again and again that he's faithful, and then we continue to doubt, well, James says, look, if you lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives freely and liberally without reproach, but let him ask in faith without doubting, because the one who doubts is like a wave tossed to and fro, and that man is unstable in all his ways. Let him not imagine he's going to get anything from the Lord. And here you have a whole generation that 10 times they saw God working, and they were not willing to do it. They were not willing. And so guess what? Did they get anything from the Lord? No, they didn't. No, they didn't. So then the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word, but truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of God, because all these men who have seen my glory and the signs which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have put me to test now these 10 times, and have not heeded my voice, they certainly shall not see the land of which I swore to their fathers, nor shall any of those who rejected me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he has a different spirit in him and has followed me fully, I will bring into the land where he went, and his descendants shall inherit it. Now the Amalekites, the Canaanites, dwell in the valley. Tomorrow turn and move out into the wilderness by the way of the Red Sea. And the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, how long shall I bear with this evil congregation who complain against me? I have heard the complaints which the children of Israel make against me. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will do to you. The carcasses of you who have complained against me shall fall in the wilderness. All of you who were numbered according to your entire number, from 20 years old and above, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun, you shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. But your little ones, whom you said would be victims, I will bring in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. But as for you, your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, and your sons shall be shepherd in the wilderness 40 years and bear the brunt of your infidelity, until your carcasses are consumed in the wilderness, according to the number of the days in which you spied out the land, 40 days. For each day you shall bear your guilt 1 year, namely 40 years, and you shall know my rejection. I, the Lord, have spoken this. I will surely do so to all this evil congregation who are gathered together against me. In this wilderness they shall be consumed, and there they shall die. Oh, isn't that a knife to the heart? Especially if you were like 19 years old and like, we're going into the promised land. And they're like, wait, we got to spend 40 years in the wilderness? Oh, man. Thanks a lot, Dad. I mean, that's a real bummer. All right. That's a real bummer. So understand that, yes, God is gracious. God is patient. But even God has his breaking point where he says, okay, that's it. Everyone get out of the car. We're not going anywhere. We were going to go to the amusement park, but we're turning around. All right. Because everyone was complaining. Okay. So, and you say, well, God is all patient. No, he's not all patient. He's very patient. He's abounding in goodness and truth. And yes, he's willing to forgive iniquity, transgression, and sin. But if you keep slandering God and you keep questioning his character and you keep saying, I don't really believe you. You may not say that with your lips, but you express it with your actions. As James said, let not that man think that he'll get anything from the Lord. And then we wonder, why hasn't God answered my prayers? Maybe that's why. Okay, because you're not doing what God said to do. Why haven't I gone into the promised land yet? Well, because you're out there complaining in the wilderness. And when he brought you to the promised land, he said, you got to do this. You're like, nope, God just wants to kill me. Of course, you're not going to go to the promised land. I mean, it's just kind of basic stuff, right? So this is the consequence. Who knows what happened to them eternally? I don't know. The Bible doesn't explain anything about that, whether they were saved or not. But they certainly bore the brunt of their decision here on earth. We'll let God be the judge of where they ended up for all eternity. Now, the men whom Moses sent to spy out the land, who returned and made all the congregation complain against him by bringing a bad report of the land, those very men who brought the evil report about the land died by the plague before the Lord. Wow. Okay. So God's fired, the tavira, right? That broke out amongst them and it killed them. But Joshua, the son of Nun, and Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, remained alive of the men who went to spy out the land. Then Moses told these words to all the children of Israel, and the people mourned greatly. And they rose early in the morning and went up to the top of the mountain, saying, here we are, and we'll go to the place which the Lord has promised, for we've sinned. And Moses said, now why do you transgress the command of the Lord? For this will not succeed. Do not go up, lest you be defeated by your enemies, for the Lord is not among you. For the Amalekites, the Canaanites are there before you, and you shall fall by the sword, because you have turned away from the Lord. The Lord will not be with you. But they presumed to go up to the mountaintop. Nevertheless, neither the ark of the covenant of the Lord nor Moses departed from the camp. Then the Amalekites and the Canaanites who dwelt in the mountain came down and attacked them and drove them back as far as Hormah. Oh boy. Again, God has a limit. We want to be careful we don't get to the nth degree, right? We want to believe quickly. And if we're having trouble, we can be like the man that says, Lord, I believe, but help my unbelief. Or we can walk humbly and say, Father, I'll admit it. I'm scared. I don't understand it. I want to believe you. I do. Help me. I'm scared. I'm afraid. I really don't know what to do. And I know I should be trusting you by now. because I know you're good. All right. So part of your posturing could help as well. Okay. But if you're trusting the Lord, you don't have to kind of grovel before him. Stand up like a man. All right. If you're trusting the Lord, then stand up, be strong, and say, okay, Lord, thank you. Let's go. I'm ready. All right. So depending where you are, right? If you're finding yourself weak and in just that terrible place, then just humble yourself and say, Lord, I'm just made of dust. I should be trusting you by now, but I'm not. Or if you're a little stronger in your faith, say, thank you, Lord. Let's go. What's the next challenge? I know there's giants there. Let's go. I can take them because you're with me. You're going before me, right? Either way, God will be with you. All right. Let me jump into the questions, guys. If there are any, no problem if there aren't. So let's see here. All right. Some good comments. I think that's pretty awesome. Some more great comments. Very good. I'm just trying to see if there's any questions. Very good. Well, thanks, guys. Love your comments. So glad that you tuned in. Tomorrow night, we got Prophecy Roundtable, and looking forward to that. So hope you'll join me for that. And of course, on Shabbat, I will be in Judges 4 and 5. So please do join me for that. Until next time.